I want to thank Carmen for that very, very generous introduction. It's just been such a pleasure to work with Carmen on many different scholarly projects over the years. We're still working on a few projects, including that we're translating the keywords into 5 different languages. And I want to point out that Carmen's keyword in the keywords book is translation. So the book is called Keywords for Environmental Studies, and we wanted to make the point that translation has to be, a keyword in environmental studies, because how can we translate this thing that we're doing, which is the environmental movement sort of broadly conceived, without translating it? We're going to have to translate all of the words that we use. So I want to thank Carmen for her many ways of supporting this movement, the environmental humanities movement, including emphasizing and foregrounding the concept of translation. So thank you, Carmen. I'd also like to thank Benedict Mayon for inviting me to this conference and allowing me to revisit some of the earliest concepts that I began working on. I feel that 25 years ago when I started working on some of these concepts, people, maybe they weren't ready. And thank you for letting me come here and revisit this. So I want to thank Benedict and also all the members of the organizing committee for inviting me to come and talk about ecopoetics. I have used other words besides ecopoetics over the years, and I'll talk about that a little bit today. So it's a real treat to be here. Thank you, especially in France. I came to France many decades ago, and it's just really wonderful to be back. Thank you. So today my talk is called Why Bears Sachamama, which means Mother of the Forest, and other transformational beings are still good to think, from ecopoetics to multi-species ethnography. And my talk today, if I can make the PowerPoint work, is going to revisit my first book, which was American Indian Literature, Environmental Justice, and Eco-Criticism, which I wanted to call my book The Middle Place. But the publishers said, no, nobody will know what that means, so we're going to switch it around. And they put the keywords before the poetic title, which now that my whole life is about keywords, maybe was a good idea. But I like to think of it as the middle place, and certainly transformational beings, which we're going to talk about today, speak of something that is more than one or the other. It is middle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. I would also like to thank my co-editor, Salma Monani. The work that I'm going to talk about today comes out of a new book that we are working on called From Earth to Cosmos, Conversations from Earth to Cosmos, and it's going to expand on some of the concepts that were innovated in American Indian literature, environmental justice, and eco-criticism, but we want to expand on those concepts, and so it's a collection in which we have chapters on the wolf and the Sami people and Sami eco-cinema, and so I hope that you'll be interested in this new book, and I'm going to talk just about my own chapter in the book today as I talk about Juan Carlos Galeano's work on the Amazon, Yakuma, which means the Amazon River, and Sachamama, which means Mother of the Forest. So the seeds of this new book grew out of American Indian literature, environmental justice, and eco-criticism. But before that book, I wrote an essay called Why Bears Are Good to Think. And still today, if you look at my work, one of my most cited essays is Why Bears Are Good to Think, and I wrote it in grad school. So for all of you who are trying to write an essay, publish something in grad school, keep at it. You never know. That might be your best work. People still look up this essay, and it's called Why Bears Are Good to Think, and I published it in 1992, which dates me. Yes, now you know. That is how old I am. I'm that old. So in that essay, I explored why contemporary indigenous writers weave the characteristics of anthropomorphic animals, androgynous and monstrous human figures, and trickster figures from the oral tradition into their indigenous characters. Why, I asked, do these characters sometimes take the shape of transformational human non-humans, or characters that sometimes are animal and sometimes are human? In more recent work, I have explored how transformational human non-humans, or what I'm now calling earth beings, in contemporary are also still a prominent feature in contemporary indigenous fiction and film. And that we see these beings emerging at the center of a cosmopolitical movement, which is an expansion of the 1980s environmental justice movement. So around the world, we're seeing this cosmopolitical movement, which still is about environmental justice, but it's also about social justice, and it also embeds this thing called cosmovisions. Now, in my book, I called it oral traditions, or stories about these ancient beings. But today, I'm going to refer to those stories as cosmovisions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how cosmovisions are laying the foundation for a cosmopolitics that is thousands of years in the making. In Why Bears Are Good to Think, I focused on Louise Erdrich's character named Fleur in her novel named Tracks, about a young Anishinaabe or a Ojibwa female character named Fleur. Fleur survives epidemics and genocide in the early part of the 20th century, and somehow she keeps moving forward. The book, though, implies that she might be something of a bear walker or a transformational being. She might be bear, she might be woman. Transformational characters from the indigenous oral tradition often take the form of bears or coyotes or snakes or even frogs, and they illustrate a worldview in which there, and this is a quote from my book, no sharp lines can be drawn between the human form and the non-human. However, not all animals suggest themselves as transformational. Only those species that are seen to embody special abilities that suggest that they can move freely between more than one world or dimension, such as air and water, are considered to be transformational. For example, a bear's ability to hibernate, a snake's ability to shed a skin, a frog's ability to survive both above and below the water, suggest that the species may be a boundary crosser and may have the ability to slip into and out of other forms. As traditional elders and writers, and I consider Linda Hogan, our special guest, to be an elder and a writer, have taught us, transformational entities represent the peculiar unity of the liminal, that which is neither this nor that, yet both. They are singled out not because they are good to eat or good to prohibit, but because, as French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss so famously put it in 1982, because they are good to think. They are thought experiments. So if you think about a bear and why bears are transformational animals, they walk upright, they hold their babies in their arms, they remind us that they are human and we are animal, because they can do the things that we do and we do the things that they do. So in Tracks, Erdrich gives Fleur the qualities of multiple transformational beings from the Anishinaabe oral tradition, or cosmovisions: the bear, the wolf, and a giant fish, the sturgeon, the lake monster. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a sturgeon, but they can grow up to 6 feet long, sometimes even longer. They are thought to be water monsters. And Fleur has the qualities of this fish. And we will come back to the sturgeon at the end of the talk, so stay tuned. Fleur is just one example of how many indigenous artists and writers set their characters into a time-space continuum of past, present, and future. And Tracks suggests that Fleur is a modern woman who might possess the strengths and power of a bear, the intelligence of a wolf, and the ability to dive in water for long periods of time, like the sturgeon or the frog. And so again, like I said, I'll come back to the sturgeon. In a more recent essay, called Whale as Cosmos, I have written about the transformational beings in Linda Hogan's work, and I wanted to insert them into this PowerPoint because she's here, and because I love People of the Whale. And in this novel, a modern character, Marco, is rumored to be half whale, half human, and he's living in the present, dealing with the oppressions and disparities enforced on indigenous people from colonial legacies. Marco and his mother call upon another transformational being, the rain priest, who may be human or may be octopus. And Marco, Fleur, and the rain priest all are simultaneously part of the ancient oral tradition or cosmovisions, and at the same time, they are embedded in modern times. Given their special abilities to move between worlds, their activities are thought to take place in that spatio-temporal framework considered cosmic, not just mundane. In short, each of these characters act as a thought experiment about the cosmos that allows readers to see how modern indigenous people survive and intelligently move forward and respond to conditions in a rapidly changing world. So each of these characters are representative of the liminal, the betwixt and between, and help to explain a world of multinatural, not universal, cosmos of relations. So in modern times, we speak of the universe, but that's one. So we're not talking about the universe. We're talking about a pluriverse, a multinatural pluriverse of multiple spatial relations and scales. In the environmental humanities today, the study of this cosmos of relations has been described as an emerging mode of research, which we are calling multi-species ethnography. I write about multi-species ethnography in Whale of Cosmos, and I write about how this new form of research is pulling creatures, animals, plants, fungi, microbes, once considered mere matter or zoe, into the world of bios and the living. This work goes well beyond the observations of Levi-Strauss. It is showing, for example, that the animals symbolically central to the indigenous cultures are not just good to think, but entities and agents that are good to live with. In fact, we cannot live without them. In fact, they make us human. And that is, of course, an observation made by Donna Haraway. To illustrate, I would like to turn now to the remainder of my talk to my work with Juan Carlos Galeano. We have co-written a chapter for the new book, From Earth to Cosmos, and I'm going to sort of summarize a little bit of our work together. Juan Carlos is a Colombian-American poet, and I'm going to analyze 4 of his poems, which are illustrated by the Peruvian artist Solmi Angarita. So we're going to be looking at the poems, and we're going to be looking at the illustrations. And they all come from this chapbook called Amazonia, which embodies the stories that he learned while he was growing up in Colombia. While his father and other community members were building houses and bridges made from wood, from trees felled in the forest, he was continually running away from his father and his family to hang out with, quote, the indigenous kids in canoes who were spending their time on the river and in the forest talking about trees, animals, and fish in their sentient realms, unquote. In interviews about these experiences, Galeano has said that he feels, quote, the spirits in the air, in the trees, in the water, everywhere, unquote. While living and working among these people whose stories find their way into his poetry, Galeano has collected and is still collecting stories about anacondas, pink dolphins, manatees, and who are said to sometimes transform themselves into humans. He has collected these stories in the folklore of the Amazon. As anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena has explained, the names of some of these beings, Pachamama, Mother Earth, Yakumama, Mother of all waters, and Sachumama, Mother of the forest, evoke not mothers, but instead androgynous transformational persons, quote unquote, persons, that embrace liminality or the peculiar unity that is, and I'll repeat, neither this nor that, yet both. These characters represent the entangled relations of complex entities that live together in ecosystems. In South America, they are recognized as persons and were recently made the subject of a conference organized by Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro called The Thousand Names of Gaia. As Donna Haraway argued in her presentation at this conference, transformational beings or persons give presence to the complex nature-culture systems and the entangled myriads of temporalities and spatialities. Yakumama, Sachimama, then, are persons that give presence to what Viveiros de Castro has described as a philosophy of perspectival multinaturalism that suggests that, quote, the world is inhabited by different sorts of subjects or persons which apprehend reality from distinct points of view, unquote. These philosophies speak of humans, animals, plants, and spirits participating in the same world. I've got my eye on Carmen in case she... We're good. These philosophies speak of humans, animals, and plants and spirits participating in the same world, although with different sensory apparati, constituting not just multicultural human worlds, but imply a unity of nature and a multiplicity of cultures, and in multinatural worlds that imply corporeal diversity and its attendant diversity of perspectives. And I wish I could tease that out a little bit more, but maybe we can talk about that more in the question and answer period. So, thus, cultural theorists, anthropologists, eco-critics, multi-species ethnographers, all of us working in these areas are revealing, or trying to reveal, why persons or transformational beings who move in a cosmic realm are associated with a hope for the future that is being termed cosmovisions, thousands of years in the making. In the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, the word cosmovisions is prominent, and it implies a thing that encapsulates what we are here at this conference to talk about, which is ecopoetics. So this word, cosmovisions, thousands of years in the making, found in the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth and Climate Change, drawn up at the World Conference on Mother Earth held in Bolivia in 2010 by representatives of indigenous, global south, and multi-ethnic groups from around the world who are proclaiming that, quote, violations against our soil, air, forests, rivers, lakes, biodiversity, and the cosmos are assaults against us, unquote. Us, the word, is emphasized to mean all living beings, all persons, not just indigenous people themselves. Delegates to this conference and many other indigenous-led meetings are advocating a coalitional politics that is taking the form of new legislation and revised constitutions in Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, New Zealand, that are giving, quote-unquote, rights to Mother Earth, to forests, to rivers, and to protecting, quote, the intergenerational space and time required for the survival and flourishing of all species on Mother Earth, unquote. Meaning, of course, that what must be protected is evolution itself. That takes time. So, now I turn to Juan Carlos Galeano's poetry to illustrate what we might call either cosmovisions, thousands of years in the making, or ecopoetics, thousands of years in the making. I will also illustrate how an analysis of eco-poetry offers examples of multi-species ethnographies that attempt to delve into stories that are telling us about not just our relation to one or two other species, but a cosmos of relations. It is still common to hear these stories told in the Amazon by people who tell just on a regular basis stories about forest mothers and about the mother of all waters. They are told for entertainment, but they are also told to theorize contemporary developments around globalization and accelerating environmental changes and widening social disparities. So in his documentary, The Trees Have a Mother, Amazonian Cosmologies, Folktales, and Mystery, Galeano records local people in the Amazon River region telling stories about transformational beings that take the form of anacondas, trees, dolphins, birds, or clouds that sometimes transform themselves into humans. The locals refer to the Amazon River itself as Yakumama, which means, as I said before, mother of all water beings. And they talk about her appearing in all kinds of forms, not just the form of a river. Sometimes she is a giant anaconda, and stories about the Amazon River or Yakumama have been passed down orally for thousands of years. Here she is, Yakumama, as represented by Solmi Angarita, Peruvian artist. In his poem Yakumama, Galeano represents the Amazon River as a serpent, and Angarita paints Yakumama as a great green anaconda, alive with the activities of humans and non-humans. And I hope you can kind of look at the illustration and see how there's people on the anaconda's back, and fish swimming around, and trees coming up out of her back. I'm going to leave the illustration up while I read the poem, and then I'm going to switch to a slide where you can look at the words of the poem. So I want you to look at the illustration, and then I'll give you the words to look at after the illustration. Here's the poem. Yakumama, the only serpent that creates rivers to keep fish happy. Every day, she takes the fish out to see the sights, takes them out to eat in out-of-the-way neighborhoods. Sometimes she travels as a ship lit up at night, people dancing, raising their glasses, or she disguises herself as a famous actress in flashy clothes. When the Yakumama so desires, clouds form along her pathway, and it's hard to imagine the life of some Renico trees without the Yakumama's tenderness. So delicate. If the Yakumama is not treated well, she'll simply take her leave. There's the words. So this poem represents Yakumama as a being, a person who, like a snake, also a person, can slip into and out of desirable shapes, such as a famous actress in flashy clothes. The humans living and traveling along her serpent back may be happily dancing and singing in boats, or conversely, in their hubris, overfishing and polluting her waters. They might engage in behaviors thousands of miles away, such as the damming of rivers for electricity, and these activities might result in warming global atmospheric or oceanic conditions that chase away the clouds that once formed along her pathway. Yakumama is delicate, and like the clouds, she may simply take her leave. As has been well documented by scientists and the media, the Amazon River is indeed disappearing. One of the largest rivers in the world is indeed disappearing as its water levels decrease. Local residents interviewed for The Trees Have a Mother fear that the river is just turning into a ditch. That's a quote from the film. They express concern about human activities, including the effect of noisy ships and outboard motors on the animals of the river, and the consequences of extensive overlogging or forestation, or garbage and pollution flowing into the river. Drought, never a problem before, is now a huge problem in the Amazon, caused by warming atmospheric and oceanic and atmospheric temperatures linked to climate change, which is predicted to reduce the levels of the river even more. In fact, up to 85% in the next 10 years. And as the water goes down, the dolphins die. The manatees disappear. The fish extinct. They all depend on this riverine ecology, which is in decline. And that makes tales about Yakumama taking her leave more than good to think. These stories become thought experiments that allow the people to compare the past, the present, and think about the future. What is the future we want? What do we want the future to look like? Do we want it to look like this? Do we want it to look different? If we want it to look different, what will we have to do to get there? Kurupira. Other persons, such as Kurupira, might be a friend to monkeys and other creatures in the forest, but enemy to those who exploit Sachamama, the mother of forests. This character is one of the most talked about protectors of nature in Amazonia and is a more than human plant being, sometimes a tree, sometimes a person, that blurs species and gender lines, sometimes a girl, sometimes a boy. In Angarita's painting, she shows Kurupira with one foot pointing ahead and the other pointing behind. So here's the poem. With one foot pointing ahead and the other pointing behind, the Kurupira walks through the jungle and tends to animals, braiding the young palm tree's hair. Hunters offer Kurupira cigars in exchange for her secrets. The Kurupira puffs the cigars. Animals, trees, fruits appear in the path of her smoke. But the men shouldn't make off with all the animals, fruits, and trees. The Kurupira will blow smoke so the animals, trees, and fruits will disappear. Blow all his smoke and make the paths vanish. She could also tell the animals his secrets for making humans disappear. Or, hunters gone. There are the words. In the Trees Have a Mother, the local residents employ Kurupira to theorize complex forces of globalization. They suggest that Kurupira, the being who once protected animals, trees, and fruits from overzealous harvest, is being driven away by loggers, miners, oil companies, agribusiness enterprises, and cocaine producers. None of these people ask, quote, for permission from the mothers of trees, unquote. That's a quote from the documentary. Instead, they destroy the forest, unquote. Kurupira is not opposed to humans making their living in the forest, and in fact, Kurupira supports humans making their living in the forest. And this illustrates that Sachamama and Yakumama become thought experiments that advocate that humans can make their living in the forest, but they must check their greed. It is greed. It is greed that is driving Kurupira away. It is driving the Amazon itself away. It is leading to drought in the forest. The forests are burning. They're going away. So, this story, Kurupira, as critique of globalization, is the space out of which cosmopolitical movements emerge, or is the space out of which cosmovisions, thousands of years in the making, inform our ecopoetics or inform our cosmopolitical movements. In the words of the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth and Climate Change, humans need to become more like Kurupira and become protectors of the forests and rivers. Humans must ensure, quote, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, the intergenerational space and time required for survival and flourishing of all species on Earth, unquote. We must protect evolution itself. If Kurupira is a being driven away and disappearing, then humans must pass the laws and write the declarations giving Yakumama, Sachumama, and all sentient beings the rights and legal protections they need to survive over the long term. Yaras. Yaras are manatees, and they have long, for thousands of years, been seen sunbathing on the shores of the Amazon River, but their numbers are drastically dropping. They are thought of as persons who live normal, if somewhat luxurious lives under the water. They're down there having some fun. They gamble. They shop. They raise their families. It's pretty nice under there. That's where they live. If you're lucky, if you're a good human, you might get to go live with them. But in Angarita's illustration, a manatee is seductive. Half man, half woman. So here are Galeano's words. Half woman, half fish, Yaras seduce men in search of adventure and riches in the jungle. Yaras live to sing, and they don't have to cook. Biologists argue that they are merely manatees sunbathing on the shores, but men inflict all kinds of wounds on the river, wounds cured by the songs of the Yaras. So these wounds that are referred to in the poem are caused increasingly by luxury tourism and overfishing on the Amazon that is causing the decline of the manatees and also the pink dolphins. And I can't even get started about the pink dolphins because I'll just keep you here forever talking about tourism and pink dolphins. And anyway, I won't get started. Pink dolphins are going away, and so are the manatees. But this poem suggests hope. These wounds can be cured, Galeano says, by the songs. The singing or the common cacophonous sounds of the Amazonian creatures call upon humans to shift their attention in the language of the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth from greed or living better to the pursuit of something else that we might call living well. The Declaration specifically defines a difference between monetary or material riches as living better and separates it from living well, which is defined as human behaviors that support, quote, a society based on social and environmental justice, which sees life as its purpose, unquote. So the songs of the Yara are made visible as things that ordinary Amazonian people are naming allies in their political resistance movements. Yaras are allies that help articulate a cosmos of multicultural, multinatural, and multi-species relationships that are being changed by chemical spills, overfishing, water pollution, and poverty. The articulation of these relations is, quote, cosmos plus politics. Cosmos are all the relations, politics, the articulation of such. Cosmopolitics, a politics that brings it all together to change the way we behave, not living better, but living well. How would we do that? Renacos. Renacos are Amazonian ficus or banyan trees. In Renacos, Angarita paints the roots of the trees, which tangle thickly with the roots of the Renacos, growing along the banks of the Amazon, bare and gnarled, providing habitat for plants, animals, and fish, and protection from erosion along the banks of the river. Here are the words. Renacos. For love or simply to find company, the Renaco trees search for another tree and grow beautifully thanks to the life of its new companion. A tree able to fall in love with another tree must have special qualities. Without caring for what people say, Renacos live to embrace other trees. Anacondas and boas who sing lullabies in their branches and understand the Renacos and find truth in their philosophy. So when the material existence of the Renacos and the worlds into which they belong are threatened by humans who, quote, don't know them and, quote, don't understand their philosophy, Renacos become like the Yaras. They transform into protector spirits. So they seem nice, but they transform into protector spirits. They can be vindictive. And they're being marshaled into a cosmopolitical movement to protect the river and protect the banks of the river and to protect the fish that grow in the roots of the Renico trees, to protect all the cosmos of relations that include these roots and the eggs that fish deposit in the tangled roots. In Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, New Zealand, Niger, and India, many, many countries around the world, cosmopolitical activists are organizing around the notion, as it is articulated in the Universal Declaration, that multiple species and quote-unquote things that have heretofore not been considered deserving of the same rights and protections as humans should now be protected by humans, who understand that their philosophies, the philosophies of the Renicos, the philosophies of the Yaras, the philosophies of Kurupira, and by legislation and declarations granting them rights to continue to exist and thrive. In other words, we must be like the Renicos, like the Yaras, like Kurupira, like Yakuma. So this is my latest project. It's called Humanities for the Environment. It is an international project in which we're organizing observatories around the world to put together projects that bring humanists to the table with scientists, social scientists, and people across the disciplines to actually create template projects. And Juan Carlos Galeano is working with me on one of these template projects. He remembers that when he was a child, government trucks would just pull up to the river and dump the trash right into the river. Well, now, all these years later, they're still doing the same, dumping it into the river. It's even worse. There's more plastic. You know that plastic gyre out in the ocean? Oh, wait, there's multiple plastic gyres out in the ocean. Well, you know, that plastic gets dumped into the Amazon. It flows right out into the ocean. And so Juan Carlos would like to stop the garbage from going into the river and therefore stop it from going into the ocean. It's an urgent problem, and it's become the source of his motivation to create a cleanup project in the small town of Padre Coche in the Peruvian Amazon. And each summer he takes his students down there to learn Spanish. What's that mean? Spanish, and also do service learning projects where they work with the local people to stop garbage from going into the Amazon. He's recently been named the convener of the South American Observatory, which will become the hub of the International Environmental for the Humanities system in South America, and we're expanding our observatories. Here's where we've got them right now. Now you're going to see a dot in South America. We'll keep expanding. And what we do in each one of our observatories is create these template projects. So Juan Carlos's template project to keep garbage from going into the Amazon, he would like that template project to be taken from Padre Coche and used in all the little towns in the Ecuadorian and Amazonian, or I should say Amazonian and Andean Amazon. Similarly, in North America, we're doing the same thing with our Humanities for the Environment Observatory. We're creating template projects that are easily available on our website. This is our website. And what you can do is you can go on the website and you can find these template projects. We have them archived. And each of our template projects asks the question, how do the humanities and arts contribute uniquely through storytelling, cosmovisions, thousands of years in the making, to solving social justice and environmental challenges? For example, my colleague and collaborator and philosopher Kyle Powys-White worked with the Little River Band of Ottawa, which is an Anishinaabe tribal group in Michigan, to put together a project to conserve the sturgeon. Remember that fish? Fleur? Part sturgeon, part bear. Well, they put together a conservation project to conserve the sturgeon. And the sturgeon connects us back to the beginning of this lecture and my earlier discussion of transformational animals and flora. And the sturgeon is a giant fish. It's thought to be, by some, the lake monster, but it's also a fish that on which the Anishinaabes' future survival depends. It is a sacred animal, but it is also a culturally important food. And so the Anishinaabe people would like to conserve the sturgeon, and so they've come up with this template project where each year they have a festival, and each year up to 600 people come to this fishery, and every one of them has a bucket, and each one of them, kids, adults, everybody, 600 people, not just indigenous people, but 600 multicultural people, pick up a baby sturgeon with their hands, and they put it in a bucket, and then they take it down to the Great Lakes, and with their hands, they put the fish into the Great Lakes. And so they literally touched this baby fish that could grow up to 30 feet long. Eventually, if people will leave it alone, if people will give it the space and time for evolutionary survival. And Kyle's point when he talks about this template project is not that they're saving an iconic species, but rather they picked the species that would bring the most people together, not just indigenous people, but all people. And so little indigenous kids, little white kids, little North American kids of all races, genders, go down to the Great Lakes and they touch a fish and they let it go. So this articulates the dynamic epistemologies that have been negotiated over long histories, thousands of years in the making, and that offer sound ethical reasoning and ecological protection models of long-term conservation practices and scientific knowledges. So the Anishinaabe people have a long-term, thousands of years in the making relationship with the sturgeon. And so they're leading the way to the Sturgeon Conservation Program. It's a template that you can find on our website. Thus, though indigenous practices have often been sidelined as superstition by mainstream Western objective, quote unquote, objective science, writers like Linda Hogan, who is with us today, writers like Kyle Powys-White, who did this project, and Juan Carlos Galeano, artists like Solmi Angarita, are showing us that multi-species relationships involve the advocation of understanding oral and written stories as archives of scientific literacies and ecosystemic complexity. This work is turning our attention to indigenous cosmovisions and cosmopolitics, and indigenous communities are often at the front line of struggles in the face of climate change and escalating ecological destruction. Therefore, many of these communities and artists associated with them, including Linda Hogan, are employing stories about transformational characters, the whale, the octopus, as thought experiments. And we, the humanists, the eco-poets that are here in the audience, are taking up these stories, and we're taking them into our classrooms, we're taking them outside into community, and we're illustrating how we might come together with scientists and people across all the disciplines to build a cosmopolitical movement with life and environmental justice as its goal. Thank you.